Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to the open house for year two of the St. Basil Writers Workshop. I'm glad to see so many of you here. This is a slightly odd time, so I imagine even more of you are going to be seeing this as a recorded video later on. But you're all welcome. Thank you all for coming and finding out a little bit more about this excellent program. The first, well, let me start by telling you a story because that's what I do. So my wife was my wife chose to have our fourth child at home. And it was one of the best things she could have done. It was an absolutely incredible experience. And it had unexpected dividends as well, because right in the middle of the process starting to accelerate, and those of you who are fathers know what I'm talking about, this is the part where you have to tune out every single possible uh, outside sound because you have to be there and ready, and things can move fast. So it was at that exact moment that I suddenly got a phone call. And I don't know what possessed me, but I answered the phone. Fathers among you, I'm sorry. I failed our collective tribe. I did terribly. And yet, this phone call was quite providential. There was Father Adam, who was was the dean of St. Athanasius College. And he had a very short thing to say to me. He said, if I could make all of your dreams come true when it comes to writing, what would it be? And I'm looking at my wife, she's looking at me, she's making gestures at the phone, and I said, can I get back to you? I cannot answer this question at this moment. Because I suppose I should have just had that answer ready. I should have been thinking about it, expecting the call to come at such a moment, but I wasn't ready. So he very kindly understood the situation. And over the next 24, 48 hours or so, as the baby came and as things calmed down, and in those beautiful early hours of the baby and the mother bonding, and the eldest three coming in quietly and looking and poking and holding a little bit, and it's all quite lovely. During that time, I had an opportunity to think about the answer to that question, and I was surprised that the answer was I wanted a place for this generation's inklings to come together and learn how to write those books that will be just as transformative as The Lord of the Rings and Narnia were for all of us. Because let's be honest, have you gone to the bookstore lately or even the library? I mean, I recently had a very unpleasant experience of walking into the children's section or the young adult section or whatever they call it these days of our local Barnes and Noble. And I think about 75% of that section was dedicated to alphabet soup books, if you know what I mean. And that used to be the section of the store that I would go to as a kid and just lose myself for hours. And the same is true of our library. Our library is in a town in upstate New York in the middle of nowhere, where the local village actually keeps the creche up for us on the old calendar 13 days after December 25th, because they know so many of us are Russian or of Russian descent. So this is the kind of place that you only read about or imagine while watching It's a Wonderful Life. Places exist. And yet, in that library, my wife happened to walk in, and there, front and center, on the front desk, there was something with two girls, preteen, finding their mutual romance. My wife, incidentally, made the librarian get rid of that book and let her know what she thought about the library's policies concerning children's fiction. So that's the situation we're in. Publishers are not interested in the kinds of stories that inspired us as kids and as teenagers and as adults. They're not interested in the transformative kinds of stories that open up a portal to a totally new world, but a world that is imbued with the presence of the ineffable and the potential, the possibility of that ineffable presence actually bleeding past the pages of the book and into our own everyday lives. We want those stories. We all have had that experience of reading the last page of The Lord of the Rings or The Last Battle, or insert whatever book from that tradition you want, and thinking, where's the next one? And then not being able to find it, or doing everything you can to read every single George MacDonald you possibly can, maybe even going back to Lord Dunsany if you're really insane, and then eventually getting to the point where, well, there's nothing left. You can't go to the bookstore, you can't go to the library. What do you do? Well, what do? We write the next one. We become those writers. But it takes, as I'm sure you know, a lot of training. It takes a lot of knowledge that probably we have not received with our mother's milk because we are not taught how to write fiction properly in school. In school, we are untaught how to write good stories. We learn how to tell and how to experience good stories when our parents tell us fairy tales. We have that innate knowledge, and most good old movies and most good old books have those structures baked in such a way that if we were readers, if we were listeners to stories from the beginning, we knew, we understood in our bones how those stories must be told. But then we went to school, and school did everything it possibly could to take those innate structures and innate storytelling instincts out of us and teach us how to write a book report. Hurrah! Teach us how to write a report, a, I don't know, an essay? Good grief. And yeah, we became very good at that kind of expository writing that is the antithesis telling good stories. And so those of us, those of you who then return full circle, whether we have kids or not, whether that's the impulse or whether it's something in us that just demands to be unleashed, we start writing that story of ours and we realize this is a lot harder than I thought, especially once you get close past the middle when you really have put a lot of words on paper and you realize after you've written for a long time and then start rereading your work that, man, this might not be as good as it felt to write. And that's simply because a lot of us don't have the practical training in how to write stories. So St. Basil then is intended not to give you the beginner's knowledge in how to put pen to paper and how to structure your story. It assumes that you haven't lost all of it in school. It assumes that you have worked on your own to learn the basics, the fundamentals. But you're at a point where either you're coming close to finishing your first or third or 10th book, and you want a little push, and you want a little more inspiration, and you want a little something extra to help you take that beautiful thing you've written and sprinkle it with fairy dust and make it something that potentially could transform not just you in the process of writing, but others in the process of reading. That's where St. Basil comes in, because we have a tremendous cadre of teachers, all of whom have published books, all of whom understand the structure and the rhythm and the meaning of good old-fashioned storytelling, but all of whom are directed with their interests, with their intention, with their life towards the future, not the past. So though they come from a traditional storytelling school, whether that's formally trained or simply by having imbibed a lot of those stories over the course of many years, all of these our teachers understand that what we're doing here is not simply rehashing the past. We're not simply trying to write a slightly different version of Dickens or Austen. What we're doing is understanding that this time has its own needs, has its own people, and has its own stories that need to be told for the people here and now, and not simply those very special people who do nothing but read Austen and Dostoevsky over and over and over again. Yes, you know who you are, and there's nothing wrong with that. But so many of us have not yet gotten there, and we want to help so many of us to get to that point. So that's where St. Basil's is. St. Basil's is a year-long program that is intended to be a gathering place, as I mentioned, for this generation's inkling, acknowledging the need for good stories that are not being published, but are definitely being written. Who is this program for? I already mentioned a little bit, but it's not for beginners. This program is something like very advanced beginner or early intermediate, in the sense that you have a clear or inherent understanding. In other words, either you've gotten some formal training or you're so good at storytelling that it comes out of you naturally. There are some very good natural storytellers that don't actually need to be formally trained in the basics. They are few, but they do exist. So either you're one or the other, and you have either finished a story or you're on the verge of finishing one. And what you want is you want to get the kind of holistic instruction that will teach you not merely the practical rules on how to get to the end, on how to put the final period at the end of the story, on how to draft your first draft into something that is publishable, but also how to live a life of the spirit while also crafting and living a creative life. When we first thought about the program, we understood that it would most likely have to be something like 90-95% online, just because of the realities of where we were at the time, which was just after COVID, and because there's a lot of people all over the world that might be interested in this. And my initial thought was that we would have a year's worth of instruction online, and then we'd all come together for a retreat at the end of the year to share our work and to kind of come together physically and cement our relationships that way. Father Adam, my boss, instead suggested that we do it the other way around, that we start with an in-person retreat in a beautiful setting where everybody is thrown together into a small house where there's a bit of that awkwardness at the beginning, but everybody has an opportunity to learn from at least one of the teachers of the course, which was the first time for me, but hopefully it'll be more than just me this time around. And a wonderful thing happened. Father Adam was right. The physical proximity of the people coming together in a single space and working together through simple story exercises and sharing their visions for storytelling and their visions for creativity created a real bond that ended up persisting throughout the entire year, even though that first year had its share of difficulties. For one, I, for the first time in my life, contracted severe chronic laryngitis and was unable to teach for an entire month, right at the time when my class was supposed to be happening. This sort of thing happens in my life. I have plans, I have great intentions, and then things happen. And still, in spite of that, the bond that was created in the in-person retreat remains strong, so much so that 2 years later, many of the people in cohort 1 are still coming together in an online, dedicated online space that's set aside for them specifically in our St. Basil's online community. And they still get together to write. They still post accountability messages to each other. They still help each other. They're still excited about showing up for various business-related webinars. They're still writing, and they're still performing that act of community that started in the in-person retreat. So that's how we're going to do it in year 2. We will start with an in-person retreat in August. Now, I know that some of you are international, and I want to underline that although the program is, of course, best if you are able to be there in person, I do not want you to not apply if you are unable to make the in-person retreat, because it's still a very, very worthwhile program. And if we have some people who are unable to come in person, it will be my responsibility and indeed my joy to do everything that I possibly can to integrate those people who are international into the rhythm of the in-person retreat, so that at the very least they can show up virtually and see the faces of their future classmates and participate in them or with them in certain story exercises. So I want that to be made clear from the very beginning. Let it not be the reason that you don't apply, because we're interested here not in the purity of the experience, but in cultivating the right kind of storyteller. And we will do everything we can to accommodate your needs. So we start with the in-person retreat. It'll take about a week or so. There will be some intensive work with me and perhaps with some other teachers during this retreat. There will be opportunities for you to workshop specific scenes or story beats with me one-on-one. And there will be plenty of opportunities for you to simply be in communion and in fellowship with other people who feel the same way as you do about the need for wonderful storytelling. And I'll tell you, as introverted as some writers can be, it was truly amazing to see the gradual opening up like a flower with its many layers of petals over the course of the several days. And although I'll be honest, at the end of it, I had to lie down for 3 days because I am one of those introverted people. It was entirely worth it. So following that in-person retreat, we immediately go into a class taught by the wonderful Nicole Rockas, which is called Soul-Centered Writing. And this is her description of the course. What role do one's faith, values, and rituals play in creative writing that is not necessarily explicitly Christian? How can we cultivate a writing life that flows from the spiritual core of who we are rather than remaining a compartmentalized professional interest. In this course, students will navigate these questions for themselves, aided by a variety of readings, exercises, and discussions. The goal is that students develop for themselves a rich foundation of practices, strategies, and values to help them be and become more faithful and self-aware stewards of their creative vocation moving forward. The course instructor, Nicole Rokas, herself an author of multiple books, has worked with several writers and authors to more meaningfully navigate the spiritual and emotional implication of writing for nearly 10 years. And I have to say that this particular course received some of the most rave reviews from cohort one. Several people said that their writing was seriously unblocked by this course. So it's one of our highlights. The second course we will have is a world building mini course given by none other than Jonathan Pajot himself. And yes, this will be very much centered and focused on his vision for the symbolic world. Jonathan Pajot, symbolic thinker and icon carver, teaches a mini course on how to build a world for your fiction using symbolic thinking. All genres, even realistic fiction, have a requirement that many writers don't fully realize. In order to immerse the reader in a novel, that novel must have a fully realized, internally consistent, and intrinsically coherent world. And this is true of fantasy for sure, of science fiction, but also of realistic fiction. Because even in realistic fiction, you still have to create a world that is fully inhabited by characters that live in a sensory in an environment that is rich for the senses. This is much more difficult than most people realize, especially considering how many people no longer have a coherent worldview of their own, even in daily life. And you will see this in the world building of a lot of fantasy, where the worlds seem diminished, small, flat, and the worldviews that accompany the quests or the story beats of those fantasy novels are remarkably shallow because the authors, more likely than not, don't have a fully realized and coherent worldview of their own. So Jonathan's course then helps writers to practice their own symbolic thinking, based largely on the way that scripture is structured. It's a fascinating course. And then applying it to thorny questions of technical world building and ultimately to create fully immersive worlds for their readers. This is a class that will have both theoretical and practical components, where Jonathan will give incredibly rich lectures about how to build a world. And then I will then supplement some practical, smaller sessions where you will be able to actually take those things that you've learned and apply them directly to the stories that you are writing now. The third course is perhaps the golden center. It is Rewilding Your Words by Paul Kingsnorth. Some of you may have actually heard of this course before. Paul Kingsnorth has been offering this course for many years, even before he became Orthodox. Last year, he was thinking about taking the course and reworking it through his newly realized and fully inhabited Orthodox worldview. He was unable to do that because of various, he was very busy last year, traveled a lot, gave a lot of speeches. And so this year, he is absolutely intent on taking extra time to redo this course so that it more fully reflects not so much the changes, but the deepening of his worldview that has come with his embrace of Orthodox Christianity. This four-part course focuses on rewilding your writing with an emphasis on stepping out of our often over-civilized selves and reconnecting with the wild world. We will learn to see the world from the perspective of wild things, take our writing out into the landscape and see what we can find, think and write mythically, and generally loosen and uncivilize our pens in search of the wild essence of capital C creation. I took this course a few years back, and I have to tell you, it was the most transformative experience in studying that I've ever had as a writer. I've taken many, many courses in writing. This one unlocked something that I never even knew needed to be unlocked. In fact, although I'm a novelist primarily, after taking that course, I suddenly found myself writing poetry. And soon after that, I actually became a published poet for the first time, something I never thought would even be possible. So it's a fantastic course. In between these courses and interwoven throughout the program will be smaller subsections that will allow you to have critique groups, both peer reviewed and from your teachers directly, Those of you who are worried about peer review, it is a dangerous thing. We'll be happy to know that we're actually going to give a course, a small mini course that will, a workshop that will intensively help students learn how to productively offer and receive feedback. I know for myself that I've received feedback that has been very damaging, and I was already at a point, luckily, that I was able to simply discount it and recognize that the person giving the advice was not qualified to do so. Other people have had experiences where they were not in a place spiritually, emotionally, or professionally where they were able to discount some badly given advice. So I myself recognize the difficulty of giving peer review. However, sometimes peer review can be a very enriching experience. So Dr. Samira Kawash, a professor of English, former professor of English, I think at Rutgers College, a frequent contributor to First Things magazine, and a graduate of year one of St. Basil's, will give a workshop intensive that will teach you all how to properly give peer review. Following that, we will have a class called Techniques of Writing Fiction. That is a new course that I'll be teaching that I've never taught before. Unlike what many amateurs think, writing fiction is not all about inspiration or talent. Writing fiction is an artisanal craft. And like all crafts, it is subject to certain rules and techniques that have been honed, developed, and perfected by masters over centuries, but ultimately come from the ancient storytelling traditions that go way back thousands of years into our own history. The good thing is that these rules are not generally prescriptive, but they are very helpful by providing certain frames and limits to what we should do. And that kind of thing is very helpful usually for us. They provide a frame within which to write your best work, and if used properly, they inspire creativity without squelching it. Led by me, this course studies the masters of the fiction form and gleans from their writing some of the most enduring tools and techniques for writing powerful publishable fiction, and with a special emphasis on how to write in specific genres and how to use the tropes and expectations of all genres in order to then transcend them and create something that is simultaneously attractive because of its similarity to previously told stories, but also exciting because of its ability to transcend those tropes and tell a story that is completely new. Our senior editor of Ancient Faith Media, Catherine Bolger Hyde, who is herself a multi-published author and a fantastic editor, will teach a workshop intensive then on the multifaceted process of perfecting your work, including ways to gain objectivity about your manuscript and what to look for at various levels from macro to micro. The goal of that course is to help students prepare their manuscripts before submitting them for publication. In addition, Catherine will offer office hours for one-to-one developmental editing throughout the spring semester. In other words, she will be available for those who need one-on-one work on their manuscript. This is a wonderful resource. She is a fantastic teacher and a wonderful editor. And this is one of the most exciting things, honestly, of this course. In the workshop's final course, I will give a short course that's tentatively titled The Track to Publication Success, where I will synthesize current market trends in both traditional and self-publishing marketplaces to help you, the students, understand the steps that you need to follow to succeed in your chosen and ideal publication venue, including, we're very happy, not officially yet, but as a slight hint to what will happen, there will be a publishing option within St. Basil's itself for St. Basil graduates. So if you have a book that is ready for publication, at the end of your cohort's year, you will have the option to submit your book for publication consideration to a new publishing house that will be established within the next month or two. I will not say anything more about that yet because it hasn't happened yet. I think it's fun to keep it as a bit of a teaser. But that's an addition that we did not have in year one, and it's something that St. Athanasius, our parent organization, is very excited to do, and I personally am very excited to start this off because it's time now more than at any point previously. It's a wonderful time for new authors to enter into what is a very chaotic, very crazy, very interesting and exciting time in publishing. A time when there is a lot of chaos out there, but there, as never before, is an opportunity for writers to become financially successful as well as creatively fulfilled, which is something that we hope to achieve for all of our students, no matter where they are when they begin their journeys. So that is a brief overview of the course itself. We really hope that at the end of this year, every single one of you will have a novel or novella that is ready to be submitted to publication. This is not simply a 9-month course, by the way. We have intentionally small cohorts and structures in place to form tight peer relationships that will continue beyond the 9 months of instruction. We have an online community space that has a dedicated room for St. Basil students and has another dedicated room for St. Basil um, for St. Basil graduates. And as I mentioned already, our students continue to use that space and continue to interact with each other. Honestly, my hope, what I really would love to see from this, is an entire wave of new storytellers, all of whom are publishing together and all of whom are helping each other sell books and become discoverable to the larger internet community of readers who want this kind of book. And for that, we need both craft and business, and you get both in the St. Basil Writers Workshop. Our previous students have this to say about the St. Basil program. Brittany has said that each class left me feeling more free to write in a way that felt real and natural. I now feel more capable as a writer, and I find that I don't get stuck as often. I'm not exaggerating when I say that I've gotten more accomplished creatively this year than I have in the last decade combined. And I don't believe I'd be where I am now without St. Basil's. Nathan says that writing for me is no longer a possibility, but a reality. I've had a clear picture of the story I'm writing for a long time now, but the St. Basil workshop has given me a clear approach on how I should write it. It has done more good for me than all my years in college combined, especially in writing fiction. And Steve said that the St. Basil workshop has been very influential for me. I'm essentially restarting my May project from scratch and checking my new version against class notes and recordings. Both the depth of the storytelling and the tactical techniques far exceeded my expectation. I've already been recommending the program. I genuinely think the course was completely worth the time, effort, and tuition. The depth of material presented is really not something I found anywhere else. Thank you, Brittany, Nathan, and Steve. So a few tips for applying. We have the application period is now officially open. I'm going to do something very sad now. Unfortunately, going to have to abandon this beautiful background and move to a far less attractive one. In fact, there are wilting flowers behind it. Please do not take any symbolic meaning from this. That is just where the charger is. And for some reason, my computer does not hold its charge as well in Belarus. There must be some sort of reason for it. I have not yet identified what it is, though. So pardon me as I move to the wilted flower section of the room. So we have already had several people apply. Applications are open. I have had a brief look at most of the applicants' samples, which are 5,000 words. That is not entirely an arbitrary amount. I think that's just enough of an amount for people to be able to either write a complete short story or show or demonstrate in that amount of space that they are capable of writing a narrative that holds together, that is coherent. So if it's 4,000, it's fine. If it's 6,000, it's fine. Please don't send me a 10,000 word novella. I will not read all of it. But yeah, it's a 5,000 word sample. The application fee is $25. You can find the application site in the chat, and I'm going to put it in the chat right now. And really, there's not much to it. You just put in your information. You send me your sample, and that's it. We're going to keep the registration window open until the end of February, I believe. Is that right, Anna?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah. So we are capping admission at 12. We consider this to be a small group program. We initially thought we would do as many as 15, but there really is something about having a smaller group that allows for the group to coalesce as a single entity. When you get past that, you start to have little cliques and things, and that's a different kind of experience, not one that we want to do. We want to have something where it's very clear that this is a single cohort of people who are very closely working together with each other. So the admission window is open. I believe admissions will be rolling. I haven't fully decided that, but that's my that is my instinct on this, which means that if I find something that I really like, that person will be admitted. So it is in your best interest to send your samples sooner rather than later. Some of you have already sent them in. Thank you. I've received them. If you haven't received an email from me, check your spam, because I responded to everybody who applied already. And I briefly looked at some of them. All of them are quite good. So I'm very excited about the level of applicants. Please do not be deterred if you consider yourself to be a beginner. I'd much rather you send me your sample anyway, because I have found that sometimes people who admittedly are beginners in the sense that they've never had formal training or have had limited formal training have an instinctive understanding of how stories need to be structured and how to tell a powerful story. In fact, several of our first cohort are published authors who've never taken the writing course and yet have been published by major publishers. So it can happen. That being said, there is a certain rhythm and structure and rule when it comes to writing fiction. So the more you know, the more likely it is that your sample will stand out. Still, send them to me. Do not be afraid. So that's the. I'd love to open the floor for questions now. Hopefully, you have as much excitement to send them in your applications as I have to read them. But yes, please ask away.
Hey, sorry.
Go ahead.
I wanted to ask, the link you sent for some reason isn't working. I don't know if it's just my computer or something.
So is this link the one that we just put into the meeting chat?
Yeah, in the chat, yeah.
I've noticed that sometimes it doesn't work. So I've noticed that for myself as well. Yeah, that's not the site. So I think the issue is that it's not, there's no www on the front of it. Let me give you the proper one and drop it into the, yeah, I've had this issue as well. Okay, so the second one is the actual one.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, Anna, www is actually, we don't own it. Yeah, so the website doesn't have a www on at the front of it. It's just St. Basil Writers. Liam, hello, good to see you.
Hi, Nicholas. Good evening, everybody. Just wonder if I could interrogate the excerpt that you're after a little bit more.
Yeah.
So for those of us that are sitting on quite chunky, quantities of text already, yes. What is it you would like to see? Would you like to see a chapter? Would you like to see an excerpt that spans a couple of chapters, takes in the tail end of one, a whole chapter and the beginning of another? What would you like to see from us?
Well, if you have a chunky piece, then I think I'd like to see something like 3 chapters or so. Okay. As long as those 3 chapters don't go too far past 5,000. So if it's 2 chapters, then that's 5,000 words. That's fine. But if you have something that's long, I think it would be useful to see the transition from chapter 1 to chapter 2. That would give me a lot of information. And if you can fit chapter 3 in it as well, that would be great. So I hereby give you permission to send me the first 2 chapters, even if they're long.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. Can it be there are no other questions? Impossible. Kathy, go ahead.
Thanks. I have a similar question. Would you prefer 5,000 words of a 8,000 word novella or a 3,500 word complete short story?
I'd prefer that you send me the
novella is a little bit better, but it's
yeah. Well, now that you've told me in person, I will know to expect an 8,000 word sample from you. So send me the whole thing.
Oh, okay.
Because if I get the word to 5,000 and I want to keep reading, I think I'll be annoyed if I can't. So yeah, send me the whole thing.
Okay. I had another question. The workshops that if one were to be accepted, all of the workshops that are online, what time of day are they given?
Yeah, so the way we did it in cohort 1, and for the most part, this worked for pretty much everybody, is at the beginning, most of the professors are fairly flexible with what they're able to offer, except for except for Paul Kingsnorth, who lives in the UK, and if most of our students are in the US, that means that it's going to be necessarily limited. But he's somebody that I think that everybody would be perhaps willing to bend over backwards just to be there live. That being said, every teacher, before they even begin, send out a special form that will help collate people's availability. And we do everything we can to choose a time and day where everybody can be there. And for the most part, most of our students have taken most of the classes in year one live. There were only a few cases where people were unable to. And sometimes that was not even for the whole course. So we do everything we can to accommodate people's needs.
Thank
If I
you.
could just jump in on that, whenever students are not able to make it live, we do send them the recordings right afterwards so that
Yes.
they're keeping pace with the other students.
Yeah, and you have access to those recordings for the entirety of the year, and even a little bit past the end of the cohort. There are some privacy issues, so we can't give you unlimited access to those courses, but you will be able to continue to have access to them for at least a few months after the workshop ends, and that's within a dedicated and completely closed off online community that people can't simply walk onto. It's protected by paywall, so all that stuff is in a safe place. Janine is asking, is this? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Katie.
How much time, like per week is required, you know, how much time?
I mean, Anna could probably answer this better than me, but my sense was that it largely depends on the course, but it doesn't go more than, say, 4 hours a week of homework. Anna, do you think that's right?
I do think that's right. One thing to note that we have restructured slightly for this year is that we're expecting students to be working on their novels independently as well as with the courses. So there are set aside times for writing your novel, but it's expected that in addition to participating in the classes, you'll be working on your novel. So that component is somewhat self-paced because you get to decide how much time and attention you're putting towards that. But I agree, for the homework itself, it's around 4 hours.
How much
So
are
in other words,
the classes themselves? How many hours per week to show up for the classes as well, you know, structured hours?
it's anywhere from 45 to an hour and a half per week.
Okay.
I don't think anybody had 2 classes per week. I think everybody had 1 class, and that class was either 45 minutes or an hour and a half.
Okay.
I will also say that what Anna said about writing your novel as you take the course, what that means practically is that there are some exercises and some homework that will not be you writing your novel. There will be some exercises where you're expanding your writerly palette, or is that the word I'm looking for? I don't know. Basically, you're going to be doing things that are going to be relevant to writing your novel, but those exercises in particular are not going to be necessarily you fiddling with your novel. They're going to be you doing things that are outside of your novel, and then you can apply those things that you've learned back into your novel later on. But just so you understand that some weeks you'll be doing writing that isn't directly related to your novel. So if you want to continue writing that novel, that'll have to be on top of the homework that's assigned for the week. I'm going to answer Janine's question first, and then Parker. Janine asks, is this workshop only for fiction writing? I write a Bible study blog and would like to expand some more essays. So initially, the way that I pitched this in year one was basically it's mostly for fiction writers. If you're a narrative nonfiction writer, meaning memoir or that sort of thing, then you might be able to get something out of it. Practically speaking, I was a little bit more sanguine, I think, than was actually possible. And those writers who were more heavily on the nonfiction ended up getting less out of the program than those who are specifically interested in writing fiction, especially fiction that is more speculative in nature. So I would say that you might want to apply anyway, but just be aware that this is a program that where its strongest teaching is geared towards those who want to tell fiction, who want to write fiction and tell those kind of stories. Parker, go ahead.
So going off of Liam's question, would you prefer our submission to be like the first three chapters, or could we do like middle portion of our novel?
I mean, that's largely up to you. I think that there is some value in sending the first few chapters, because the way that you start a story tells me a lot about where you are as a writer. And yes, beginnings are hard. So you're not expected to have your beginning perfectly formulated and crafted when you're still writing your story. So I'll leave it up to you. The only problem is that I have limited time to read, and it is absolutely true that even though I am very positively inclined towards all of you, if I, as a reader, am not grabbed by the narrative because I'm confused by who the characters are and what the relationships are and what the world is like, then I'm much less likely to feel well disposed towards that writing sample than if it grabs me from the beginning, right? So that's what I would say. I
Okay.
think probably your best bet is sending the beginning.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, you're welcome, Janine. Yes, speculative fiction is a wide term for anything that's fantasy, sci-fi, horror tinged. It's a very wide umbrella. It includes some things like magical realism, or even historical novels that have my favorite example of that kind of thing is Loris by Eugene Votoskin, who wrote a historical novel. Loris is a historical novel, but really interesting sci-fi-ish elements and fantasy. I want to tell everybody that this issue with charger is worse than I thought. I am charging it, but it if anything you all said.
Deacon Nicholas, you're breaking up just a little bit and your screen has frozen.
Come quick in case I suddenly disappear.
Everyone, if we lose Deacon Nicholas, feel free to stick around and I will try to field your questions as best as I can. So feel free to keep them coming.
I do have a question for you, Anna, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to hear maybe just a little snippet of your experience, and maybe if you could tell us like a little bit of like how you came in as a writer and your progress over the year.
Yeah, thank you, Inga. I think we have a couple other past students here as well, so maybe we can invite them to chime in when I'm finished. But I've been writing for as long as I can remember. I always was a writer as a child, and it's something that at some point in my life, I was always writing, whether it was poetry or fiction or something else. But a few years prior to when I applied to the workshop, I decided to kind of recommit myself more seriously to the craft of writing. And that was because I had this story idea that had just haunted me for some 15 years. And I thought, okay, now is the time to commit to it more seriously. I had no context. I didn't know Deacon Nicholas personally. I didn't know any of the other instructors. And so I just submitted my application and was over the moon when I was accepted. And the program completely not only lived up to my expectations, but far surpassed them. And I think that was for a couple of reasons. Number one is that we really were given so much craft and business information that I had not found in a lot of the courses or books that I had read and taken. And I had previously actually taught creative writing, so I had immersed myself quite a bit in a lot of books and tutorials. But it was just at a different level. And I think part of that too was that it was a very faith-based community of people who are trying to accomplish something similar. And then I think the other reason that it really impacted me as a student is that um, we formed very tight bonds peer-wise. And I think I've always been a very self-motivated, disciplined person. So while I was writing every day before the program, there's something about writing with other people and seeing their ideas and being inspired by them that allowed my writing to really blossom and take on a lot more life than I had anticipated. So where I am today with it is I'm getting ready to publish my first novel that I completed during the program, the first draft of, and then have been revising since then, and I'm about to publish. So if you have any other questions, feel free. And let me just check. I think we had Barang here earlier, who is a previous student. I'm not sure if he might have had to go, but if we have any other previous students, feel free to chime in.
Can you all hear me now, or am I still gone?
You're back.
All right.
So I think probably of everyone here, I'm probably the most beginner because I have about, I think 14 stories I'd like to do at some point. Some I've had for a few years now. And I have them quite developed in my head. And I've done for a number of years now, I've been doing quite a bit of research. Story Embers is one of the websites. It's not Orthodox, it's Christian now, that has some really good info for story building and everything about writing. So I think the biggest, at least from recently, the biggest amount of writing I have is probably only like, I think it's like at least maybe like 400 or 500 words at least. So it's not a lot. I could work on that more in time for the application date. Um, and it obviously needs some improving because it's just a first draft. Could I send that in?
Sure.
Okay.
Yes. Go ahead. Like I said, I don't want to discourage anybody from applying. I will also say that I will be personally developing a bridge course for that's geared specifically at cultivating beginners and getting them to a point where their application will be more likely to be considered for St. Basil's. That's something that I'll be working on over the next few months, and I'll be probably making it available for people in May, right around Orthodox Easter time. So
Okay.
that's definitely something I'll be letting people know if I feel that their submission is not strong enough yet.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Any more questions?
What
Well,
textbooks do you think you might be using? Do you have a sense of them or?
yeah, it's an interesting question. It's the textbooks. How should I say that? A lot of this instruction is based on the life and writing experience of each individual teacher. So a lot of the books are unexpected. You'll have recommendations from Paul Kingsnorth that are basically collections of poetry or certain classics of nature writing. I might recommend one or two craft books, something like GMC by Deborah Dixon, or the Techniques of the Selling Writer, or John Truby's recent book on genre. Um, Nicole might recommend one of her books. Jonathan won't recommend anything because what he talks about is only in his head. So it's not, the real answer is that it's not really going to be textbook based, and whatever books that we recommend are really going to be just that, recommendations to fill out the full experience. But the teaching is happening in person. It's not the kind of thing where the teacher shows up and gives you kind of pointers and then you go home and fill out the rest of the knowledge, the real essential knowledge in your textbooks. Just sometimes what college courses are like the really meaty stuff, it happens in person. One of the really nice things about this course, I think.
Yeah,
Yes, Kathy, go ahead.
right, just one other quick question. One, to the submission process is just submitting the $25 application fee and the writing sample. There's no other like information that you need to submit. It's just those two things.
Yeah, there's a form. It's your information. Then you pay the application fee and send by email. It'll prompt you how to do properly the your sample, and that's it. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, no need for recommendations or transcripts or anything like that. So it's simple. Well, if that's it, I expect to see at least 20 applications, although some of you already sent them in, so it won't be 20, but somewhere around 15 or so applications over the next few days. Yes, I expect them, so please send them. But yeah, I'm really excited to see you all. Thank you for the excellent questions. I don't know if you can tell, but I'm very excited to get this thing rolling again. I already have visions of the house in the Adirondacks where we're all going to meet, if that's where we end up meeting. That's a little bit up in the air. Go ahead, Katie.
Where in the Adirondacks?
It's near Lake George. That's the place where we met last year. But Anna is doing everything in her power to convince me to move it closer to Colorado. So I don't know. We'll see.
Is it Silver Bay?
No, it's I forgot the town. It's not. I mean, you won't even see it on most maps. It's in the middle of nowhere.
I grew up outside of Albany.
Okay, very good. Yeah, I live near Cooperstown when I'm not, in the wilds of Belarus.
Maybe we should take a quick poll right now and see who's more excited about.
Yeah. You'd like that, yeah. We'll wait and see. It's too early to commit. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for coming. And yeah, like I said, I expect a lot of applications over the next few days. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
See you soon.
Thanks so
Thank
much.
you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Thank you.